Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, hello. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. I'm glad that we're able to do this episode. For anybody who was ready for it yesterday, we did have to reschedule last minute. Francois had a little snafu. First, you get that ticket, and then yesterday you got a flat.
I had a flat
happening.
also. I had a flat in Atlanta before too, and that's why I had to replace all my tires. So these are brand new tires. Yeah. So they're brand new tires, but I guess somewhere along the lines, I picked up a screw in my tire.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, I could try to repair it. It's probably going to take longer for me to sit here, run to the gas station, grab the little repair kit because I have the inflator. And I was like, okay, when I come out, maybe it'll be good. First, on the way, out to lunch, I was like, something's kind of weird. And then I stopped. I was like, there is something weird here. I didn't want to risk it, though.
Does your car not have the low tire pressure indicator?
So it didn't have that activated. So I think what it does is it activates like a info circle. And I wasn't, wearing my seatbelt, and
shame, sir.
So I was like, oh, it's probably just the info, thing saying that, put on your seatbelt. Whatever. It's just a flat. I apologize to everyone. Things happen. It's the joy of going live, and I apologize for it. I was also late today. It's a chaotic few weeks.
I mean, it'd be like that sometimes. I understand. Yeah. Look, here's the only thing that I can say. We've got a 9 a.m. podcast on Friday and on Monday. Yes. We're both going to at least you're doing it from home. I've got to get my butt into the office by then. And I'll tell you what, somebody else, it's just so much. Well, I could.
Yeah.
I could. I might.
Just do it from home. We'll do it from
Friday
home.
Friday and Monday from home.
Well, yeah, wake up in the morning, have a nice cup of coffee in your own kitchen,
sit on my patio and have coffee. I will say I need now that I don't have a dog, because Jagger, I was watching Jagger this last week for Jada. She's back. So he went back home with mom. Now that I don't have another living creature to wake me up at 7:30 every morning to go potty, I tell you what, somebody else needs to be in charge of my alarm clock because Sleep Lisa cuts it off when I'm not here yet. So this morning I rolled over and I checked my phone. It said 8:30 and I was like, shit. And I'm running around my apartment to get here.
Time to go. Well, we don't have the joy of waking up with beautiful weather every single day. And I feel like so many of our guests do. We had someone call in from Miami in a beautiful backyard.
He just works from his backyard all the time, Adam Schaefer. And I was like, dude, this is a green screen thing? He's like, no, this is my backyard. Bro.
Now we have Oren with a beautiful living room in his background, probably always sunny. I doubt that it ever rains down there. I just imagine the most beautiful weather that you could wake up to with a beautiful sunset, that would be Orange County. In my mind, I don't know. I've never been there, but I imagine it's better than Northern California.
I don't know nothing about anywhere in California. I've been to Huntington Beach one time for 3 days for work. I drove into Temecula, which is a rough town. I did not know. And sat in LA traffic, which makes Atlanta traffic look like child's play. And I did not think that was possible. LA traffic is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. And I wish to not see it again if I could avoid it. I'm not sure if that's Orange County or not, but Oren can let us know. Today, our leader is Oren Schauble with Guinn Partners. Oren, hello. How are you?
Hey, how you doing? Pleasure to be here. And yes, it is sunny. It is a beautiful day in Orange County. You can get this lifestyle anytime you want, just with some higher taxes. So
Well, and so where is Orange County? It's Southern California?
Yeah, Southern California. So right below Los Angeles. I moved here about 3 years ago from Austin, Texas. I did the opposite migration I feel like most people are doing. But
Oh, and what's the other state? Is it Idaho that a lot of Californians are moving to?
Yeah. Boise's a great little town, kind of like a sleeper, or was a sleeper prior to, I think, the pandemic. And now I think everyone knows and is going there for, greener pastures.
Yeah. And then there's a city, is it Eagle, Idaho? Somebody that I used to work with lived in California, and they moved there, and then her husband got under real estate, and there was just this mass exodus into this one town in Idaho. It was wild.
I'm sure they loved it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure someone loved their property value escalating, and then moving to another rural Idaho town.
Exactly. Well, Oren, thank you so much for being here. Would you tell us a little bit about your background and what exactly is Guinn Partners?
Yeah, sure. So my background is a long time marketing and product development. So I served as the vice president of marketing in the outdoors industry, and then later in the consumer drone industry, and built out the kind of consumer drone channel into retail. And then after that, I ended up starting Guinn Partners with two other partners who are still really active there now. And it's a product development agency in Austin that specializes in helping people build, design, and scale products in the robotics and drone space. We had that for about 2 years, and I actually went and joined a vertically integrated kind of cannabis company in California, and we had spent about 2.5 years building that, took it public, and then I recently kind of stopped working with them as they go on their next journey, and now I'm back, helping people develop products and bring them to market, and then solve all the challenges from supply chain to product market fit to scaling their businesses that happen now, and it's an exciting space to be in, get to work with lots of entrepreneurs every day in different ways and capacities. And, especially as the world changes, there's all kinds of opportunities for new businesses. So I love it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we could have a whole episode about the cannabis business. I mean, obviously, because it's not as legal here in Georgia. Yeah. Definitely, like within the city of Atlanta, it's decriminalized, but it's not legal. And then outside of the rest of it, it's still outside of the city of Atlanta, still very illegal. So it's kind of very black box. We can't go to, what are they called? Dispensaries or anything like that. We still have to have a plug.
It's a super complicated market. It has all its own challenges. Go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like it.
The supply chain is very complex. I have a buddy that works up at, or he manages Rise in DC and a few other locations out there. And he was explaining to me the supply chain. And obviously I'd love to nerd out about supply chain. And there's just so many complexities in the distribution of it. And, when you're that close to Virginia, Maryland, DC, and you could go straight very easily by just going into the wrong state, it gets even more complex, I guess, up there.
Yeah, and I think, in California and in the West Coast, at least, there is a excess of quality actual agricultural product. And so then really the supply chain complexity comes down to what all the other businesses have to deal with, which is we're importing components for packaging from China. There are some things around that too, where everything has to be child resistant and certified child resistant. And there's certifications that come with that. And there's changing regulation, and they'll say, hey, in this state, for instance, in Florida, you can't really show any branding on your packaging. Whereas in California, you can essentially have whatever. In Oregon, they won't let you have any caricatures or figures. And so as you begin navigating all these different regulations state by state, it's really hard to keep brand consistency. And then also buy components that you can use with all these different regulations that make sense with the varying margins. But that's kind of any emerging industry. I think that's why it's exciting to people, is that there's opportunity if you jump through all the hoops. But yeah, it's definitely challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, that's not why we're here. We're not here.
Well, I know why we're here, but I do want to touch on something that we don't talk about enough, and that is product development. And would you mind if we talked about that just a little bit when it comes to when you are working with brands and entrepreneurs? Where do those conversations usually start? Do they start with just a great idea, and then I guess can we delve into that a little bit too?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 stages where those conversations typically happen. One is I have an idea, I need to make it a reality. So basically you're getting from idea to prototype, which is 0 to 1 is kind of the hardest thing to do, is take this thing out of your head and actually make it real. And that's where I know kind of different levels of expertise come in terms of, hey, you can make one thing and it's going to cost some kind of crazy amount, but let's make this thing and make it work, make it exactly what we want. And then you have the second stage of this. And I think this is becoming more common, especially as more service providers come up. People realize how much they can do by sourcing overseas, or their engineers, and they have certain skill sets they've learned online, where someone's actually made a prototype and said, hey, I made this thing. Isn't it great? Now I actually want to scale it, and I want to build a brand around it, which is significantly harder, because you're like, well, how much did this one cost? Oh, well, it cost me $1,000. How much do you want to sell it for? I want to sell it for 100. And you're like, all right, well, there's a supply chain variance here we're going to have to solve. And then the last thing is people that have actually made a product and put it out there and are wondering where to go. And I've been spending a lot of time recently within that stage. It ties a little bit into, I think, what we're going to talk about here, where it's like, hey, we've made 1 product or 2 products, but how do we ideate a full line so we can do upsell and cross-sell? How do we make sure that we succeed with that? How do we expand and scale from there? And some of that problem comes into product development. and really brainstorming what's going to work and what your customer wants, and figuring out how you experiment in a way that makes sense and doesn't burn too much money. But then also, how do you skip some of the stages that your company might not be at? How do you actually jump to a place where, hey, if we're not great at email marketing, how can we, acquire some expertise of that? And so that's where I've been spending the most of my time. But I think those three categories are really, I feel like, where most product development kind of happens, especially in this kind of newer entrepreneurial world. I think a lot of people are in because they're enabled by TikTok and social media and the kind of DTC we're in now.
Yeah, that first one. I mean, our parent company, Noviland, primarily handles sourcing and manufacturing overseas. And a lot of times we get a lot of brand owners with amazing, like some of the most amazing ideas I've ever seen. But the aspect of or the knowledge that they don't have in the development of like, hey, we do have to make prototypes, and there's going to be several prototypes, and you're going to have to test out different materials and different packaging. And do you want it ready to assemble, or do you want it fully assembled? How is that going to impact your shipping costs? Yeah. There's so many complexities that go into it that are just overlooked, and it's unfortunate. So that's why I just wanted to touch on that very slightly. Yeah. But diving into that third stage, I guess at what level is that company already? Are they already selling, a few hundred units, a few thousand units?
Yeah, I think that typically if you're ready to make a jump and you're really thinking about the next stage, you need to have some level of cash or profitability, right? And so I think this is really, and it also depends on the cost of the product. So I've dealt with this with really high-end luxury products where, hey, we've sold 100 or 200, and we're selling them at $5,000, $10,000 units. And they're really wondering, how do we expand that? And then also people who are selling thousands of units, but a singular SKU. And they're saying, hey, we've found product market fit with this one thing, but we know that we can't rely on one thing to build our business. And how do we kind of build out that SKU set? And so, and I have kind of a whole spiel I talk through around that of like, hey, you have hero SKUs, you have secondary SKUs, you have limited editions, you have attachment SKUs on top of the things you do sell, like whether it's cases or accessories. And then you have seasonal SKUs, then you have value SKUs if you want to sell a lower price point. And then you have like aspirational SKUs if you want to launch your special edition with a yacht company or whatever it is that has a really high value. And it's just kind of, you take that map and you start to look at, what consumers will actually want. What do you have the ability in your factories to actually develop? What's going to take what cash and timing, and begin to build an operating plan.
And taking a step back, because I don't want to just sort of gloss over the product market fit. A big part of our audience are solely Amazon sellers, let's say, and they understand their product market fit there, but that could be very different when you're moving DTC. What conversations are you having with them when it comes to product market fit?
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of people think they have product market fit and don't, and you may have product market fit on a platform. So success on a platform doesn't equal product market fit overall. And Amazon's a great example, because if you're owning a search term on Amazon and you're saying, hey, I'm owning, longest USB-C cord or something of that nature. Is it product market fit? If Amazon can come in and say, hey, Amazon Basics now has this product, and guess what? You're gone. Are your consumers still going to come to you? And so I think there's a difference between success and product market fit. And I try to articulate that a lot. And I feel a litmus test that I like to give to entrepreneurs when we talk through this is, okay, if you turned your website off for a day tomorrow, like, would anyone notice? Like, would people be kind of banging down your door being like, I can't get this product? That's kind of one way to look at it. And the other is there pull through to you? Are you getting retailers and distributors and people being like, hey, I have to have this product? And an interesting example of that in the brand I worked on is there's this brand called Chlorophyll Water, and they sell on Amazon, they sell in Whole Foods and Sprouts, and they were being decently successful, and they started to take off on TikTok a lot. There ended up being like 100 million hashtags using this. It became a bit of a trend, and he really could see, I'm getting demanded by this, the founder, where new retailers are coming to me. And then when they get it on the shelves, it's moving at a faster pace than things traditionally do in that category. So he's getting shelf space that he wouldn't typically be able to get if he didn't pay or have some level of access. And he really found that fit and found longevity within it. But plenty of people also are just a victim of a trend. It pops off on TikTok, it gets into a store, but then it's gone in 2 months. So there's a lot of variables that come into it, but I really like to look at that demand variable. Another good one is, are people knocking you off considerably? And because everyone gets afraid that someone's coming after their category. But I look at, imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? Like, if that's happening, you're probably achieving something that is unique, and you need to be pressing forward to kind of get ahead of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
there's just a delay. That's a great answer.
It makes sense. But when it comes to demand, I guess, do you set milestones for understanding, hey, we have achieved product market fit. We're ready to take this to the next level of scaling this up?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, hey, there's some singular formula for that. It's really kind of evaluated brand by brand. But really it's when, when that demand is coming to you in a considerable fashion versus you having to go out and get it. And I would just kind of look at like how much of this is paid advertising, is you forcing it versus how much is coming to you. And when what's coming to you outweighs what you're putting out is kind of just an easy basic test. But other than that, it's not like I can do a unit per store per week or anything. It's just so different depending on what category it's in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes complete sense. And so as you're working with them to scale up, we talked about, and you touched on the email marketing, for example. Yeah. When you're talking to their marketing team, what are you looking for in that conversation? Are you looking for them to have established, let's say they're not running paid ads anymore, but they're running SMS marketing, and it's very, very successful. Are you looking for new opportunities for them to grow, or are you looking to optimize what they already have?
Yeah, so I think if someone is good at something that already exists, it's good to leave them to it. And I usually chunk it into, like we do what's called a brand audit, and we kind of chunk it into several different categories. And one is you look at the website and say, okay, is load times and conversion, everything on the website great? And then there's the back end of the website, the SEO side. Like, are they getting traffic for terms that aren't branded? And that tends to be a huge opportunity because I've found that most new businesses just kind of ignore that, right? Like they'll take their branded terms, maybe they'll put an article or two up and the main reason they ignore it is because everyone thinks so short term. They think, what can I do next month to get sales? SEO is long term, but if you own it long term, then you're going to get that money in perpetuity, right? So it's kind of a bit of a trade-off. And then you look at your email marketing, your SMS marketing, your paid marketing, your social media presence, your influencers, your collaboration, and then your retail support. And I kind of chunk those out as the buckets. We look at them one by one. But really, if a team is even moderately good in an existing thing, I feel like let them operate that and get better at that. They're going to, if they've already achieved that, they can help optimize. What I think we really zone in on is, what are you not doing? There's a complete new channel to execute. And for a lot of those conversations right now have evolved around introducing SMS to brands that don't have SMS if they're doing email, because I think a lot of people are just afraid to make that jump, but it's so valuable, and I think you bringing it up can tell it's obviously high on your radar. The second thing that jumps out a lot is SEO, of like, hey, I know you're not going to see results for 6 months, but like, let's put together a comprehensive plan to actually act on that. The third one that comes up all the time now is TikTok, especially with older brands, because they're just afraid of jumping on it. And if they have jumped on it, they're probably not doing the right content. But that transition is huge. Most of the clients that we have that are good on TikTok are seeing just way lower cost of conversion and way higher return on ad spend than any other networks they're using. And so it's about getting them over that hump to adopt that. And those are the ones that have stood out recently. It kind of changes as time periods go. SMS wasn't much of a priority. TikTok wasn't around. There's a lot of things that come and go. But those are the ones that are really popping out when I see brand opportunities of what they can do to scale.
Right. And when you're talking to them about scaling up into these newer opportunities, let's say a more traditional brand or one that's been around for a longer time that's hesitant to go into TikTok, do you advise that they experiment with it initially with their internal team, or is it something that you just immediately want to start outsourcing?
Yeah, I think I always try to look at like, TikTok's a really particular one where I do highly recommend people outsource. Almost everything else I say, hey, build a plan with somebody, bring in an expert to help you build. But you should try to execute as many of those things yourself as possible, because the more reliant you are on those external vendors and things like that, just the more disconnect there is from the team and the product and process. And I just feel like a lot of those things that should be tied in, whether it's email marketing, text marketing, SEO, should be almost built into your product roadmap, in my opinion, just really tightly tied internally. But TikTok's one where you have to have people that natively understand the platform. If your team starts experimenting, their learning curve is going to be so far away. Whereas there's hundreds of thousands of creators out there who have 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 or more followers who are looking for the ability to create for brands and to monetize their skill set. And if you can get someone who is a good representation of your brand, people like to follow people and personalities more than they like to follow brands themselves. And I feel it's really important to associate that. And so there's a big opportunity there. Another related thing is that a lot of what happens, whether it's email marketing or SEO content or social media, is really the challenge isn't developing something completely new. It's about repurposing things you already have. If you're good at one type of marketing, if you already have great YouTube videos or a great podcast or a great Instagram, it's all about how I take that Instagram content and make it into long form blogs. How do I take those YouTubes and find clips that work for TikTok? It's and that's something that really needs to be handled by someone with an expertise of the company to know what they can cut out and move around versus kind of saying, hey, just figure it out to an external agency.
Mm-hmm. And when you're recommending outsourcing the TikTok kind of engagement or that part of their strategy, and working with those influencers, do you recommend often that they do it kind of on a contract basis or try to bring them, actually onto the team full time?
Yeah, I think contract basis, because you don't need someone that's doing just your brand for that. Really you need someone who's making 2 videos a day and they can do that in kind of X amount of time. And those people are, what I find with employing creatives in general is that if you try to lock them into working all day on one thing, they're going to be unhappy and they're going to leave at some point. And so it's only natural for people that are, especially if they already have their own presence, they want that income, they want some level of stability, but they also want to be able to work on their own thing. And I think that with this kind of creator generation that we're seeing, like that's the only way to engage that's going to make everyone happy. So I would say a contract basis works.
Gotcha.
And that would just be having something like a content manager strategize, what type of content they're making, when to release it, what platforms to release that on, that type of stuff.
Yeah, really kind of coordinating announcements. Because I also think with TikTok too, is a lot of it's just making a lot of content that has the right hooks and it's following some of the right trends and it's telling the story. But you really want to leave that to the creator and then just weave in your timeline and say, hey, we have these launches, we have these focuses, we have these promotions. But really the rest of the time, do what you think the network's going to do that works. Because that's something that I've been talking to a lot of brands about who are not succeeding on social media and it usually comes down to they're trying to keep some high brand standard or keep this tied right to this promotional calendar. And that's not what works on social media. What works on social media is what's happening at the time and like the trends that are going on. And if you try to keep some huge standard, like that's not going to work if what the trend that's happening is user generated content or things that are very ad hoc on an iPhone and you're trying to make these like beautiful complex pieces and you're going to waste money doing it. But it's hard to get brands to understand that you have to play by TikTok's rules or Instagram Reels rules or even, LinkedIn's rules versus whatever concept you have in your head of what you want for your brand.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing. There's like a big, kind of a push of like, batch creating your Reels or batch creating your TikToks because it saves you a ton of time, right? Like just make, get 5 or 6 outfits, make like 20 of them in an hour and a half, and then just, feed them through to the algorithm. But it's like the trends move so fast on TikTok and it really does. I mean, I'm less so experienced with TikTok than I am Instagram Reels personally, but like even with Reels, if it's too old of a trend or like if you made it in TikTok and you do upload it onto Reels, they are reading that watermark and they will, suppress that content.
There's little tips and tricks to get around that, but
yeah, there are for sure. But it's like you have to be on them like ready to go like consistently.
And the value is huge when you do. What happens organically and the sales and the followers and things that come through is massive. And we've seen that with some of the brands that can just lean in. It's just actually getting people to that point.
Mm-hmm. But have you found kind of a difficulty in like level setting expectations about virality of content, like either somebody not going viral quick enough or if they go viral super, super fast and then it kind of like dies off? Do they just say like, well, we're done with TikTok then?
Yeah, this is the conversation I've had a lot because, every social media manager, it's the kind of nightmare is when someone comes and says, can you make this go viral? And you're like, well, that's not how that works, right? And so I really like to stress to brands because I empathize with the social media manager's position, especially in today's world and like community management and just how complicated it is and how many hats you have to wear and you're sort of have no choice. And I usually like to say that, hey, if you go viral, great. What's going to happen is a spike of traffic for people that probably don't really care, and then it's going to go away, and it's going to set the standard you're never going to live up to again. What you really care about is consistency. Does that virality mean that now you're going to be able to get 1,000 views on every video when you were getting 300 before, or you're going to be able to get 2,000 now when you were getting 1,000, and really just measuring those consistent metrics? Because that's what's successful over time is saying, hey, are my actual customers continually looking at content in increasing numbers? And that increase, even if that's single-digit percents every month or quarter, is going to lead to a significant shift. And that's what people should be aspiring to, is like consistent growth versus, and virality potentially escalating that versus saying, oh, we just need to keep attempting to go viral every time, because it's not realistic and it's not giving you the traffic you really want. And it's not a metric I feel like is worth working on, for most brands.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So just to get that out there, it's so hard. It's like make it go viral. It's like, that's not within my control. But outside of like TikTok and Reels, you had kind of mentioned earlier, acquiring the talent to take care of some of the things that maybe your in-house team hasn't already mastered or kind of, have a hold on, which kind of ties into the topic of the day of micro acquisitions. So what exactly are micro acquisitions?
Yeah, so this is a category that has always been around, but I feel like has really gained some steam here in the last year. And that's saying, hey, it's not about buying some giant business with a ton of due diligence. It's about, hey, I'm spending, $100 to $100,000 to buy a smaller business and by business, that can mean a lot of things. That can mean a selection of social media accounts, and that's kind of a bit of a gray area. It can mean a small website. It can mean an email newsletter. It's about saying, hey, if there's some of these things you can use to kind of growth hack or jumpstart our way to something, how do we, instead of having to build that from scratch, do a smaller buy to get there? And the reason this has become such a popular topic is there's been a bunch of platforms that have gained a lot of adoption and who have kind of launched in this space. One is a website called MicroAcquire. Another one's a website called Flippa. I think it's Flippa. And there's a few of these that just basically aggregate small businesses that are for sale and allow people, like in a marketplace format, to due diligence on them and buy them. Shopify actually has their own version as well, just for Shopify stores, where you can verify the revenue and things like that for just smaller businesses. And this does a couple things. It means if you're actually just building small businesses or building newsletters, you have an option to actually sell those when you get bored with it, or you get a full-time job, or whatever kind of comes up that people say, hey, I don't want to continue those. They don't just die. They can get some value as they move on. And then it gives these businesses opportunities to buy some of this. And so a good concrete example of this is I did a workshop with a company last week who had bought a site purely for their SEO and domain authority. So what this means is that they didn't have any content. They're a new business, they're a startup, they'd raised some money, and they wanted to put out a lot of content to build SEO on these really specific topics related to manufacturing. And so they found a content site that did manufacturing. They bought it, essentially by hiring the founder, and some cash. And they had, and now they have all the content that this website existingly had that they can repurpose into their own. And they have a site that has like a 60 domain authority, which means that if they put blogs and content on there versus their 5 domain authority brand new site, it's going to have a lot higher of a chance of ranking in Google. And so just them being able to jumpstart to that is, a significant, if someone wants to lean into SEO, that's going to cut the time of their success from, hey, it's going to take 6 months or a year or 2 years to really see SEO to, hey, we might be able to start ranking for some of these terms next week. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about. And email lists is another good one, where if you want to build an email newsletter, there's probably one out there that has 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 subscribers who are really active with somebody who's on that topic already. And maybe that person is looking to have a more stable income, or they haven't figured out how to monetize their list, or they don't want to run it anymore. And I think those are all really unique opportunities that businesses should be considering, because you can buy some of those businesses for hundreds of dollars or low thousands of dollars. And that investment versus the time it takes to build all that out is considerable. So I think it's an interesting category.
And with branding, so let's go with the example of like the email newsletter, like you had mentioned before. Obviously, the benefit from the business purchasing that newsletter is going to be the email list. Like that's very obvious. But would you recommend that they rebrand the newsletter to match their brand, or kind of continue to run it separately so that the recipients aren't kind of thrown off?
So usually I recommend it's like a 3-stage process. So at first glance, just run it exactly like it has been, and just make sure that nothing drops off. You have you kind of have the content flow down. You understand what the people like, and just run it with its existing name. And that could be anywhere from a week to a couple months. The second is do a powered by model. So you can say, hey, all right, this is now the same newsletter, and it's powered by Cisco or whatever it is. And so you're introducing the new brand to it. Maybe you move, if there was advertising in the newsletter, maybe you move the advertising to the brand, or you do something like a founder's introduction and say, hey, I'm really excited to talk to you about, I've become a part of this company. Like that founder's email, especially from a voice they already know, becomes really powerful. And then you kind of need to think about your roadmap of what do you want to do 6 months to a year from now? Because in that first couple months, again, you keep the voice, maybe do a powered by, and think about where you're going to go. And then you say, how do we kind of carefully steer this? Because you don't want to lose the audience, you don't want to lose the subscribers. But for a lot of these, it's like, hey, if you're curating a newsletter in the food and beverage space, and it gets bought by a food and beverage manufacturer, you want to keep that content going. You just want a different call to action. And so you can very kind of subtly change that email or change the voice it's from, but keep giving the value to the consumers. And that's where I really always focus on when I'm talking through this is the value still there for the reader? Because that's what's going to get them to leave or not. Is if they're still finding whatever that value was that brought them there in the first place, you're going to be able to retain them, and you're going to be able to add on whatever offers or comparing things you want. But if you lose that value, then you're going to lose the reader. And I think that that's the important thing to think about. But it's that 3 stages. Just keep it running and power it by something, and then transition it eventually into what you want it to be long-term.
And then what about like alignment with privacy policies? So like when somebody signs up to an email newsletter, obviously whether or not they read the terms and conditions or terms of use or whatever, they are agreeing for their information to be used by that organization for X purposes, like marketing, retargeting, things like that. Once a business then purchases that newsletter and kind of absorbs those contacts, does there have to be alignment between the policies?
Yeah, and that's why it's important that, so I think two things to note. Like, that's why it's important as an acquisition versus just buying a list, is actually acquiring the business that has those rights, and also just continuing to use it for that use. If you were to buy that email newsletter and then immediately start just spamming them with things to buy, like, that's a kind of a different story, depending on what they're opted in for. But if they're opted in to receive this content newsletter, then great. And then what you can do from there is you can offer options within the newsletter to opt into other things, or, just get them to explore different funnels on your website. But acquiring the entity overall versus just acquiring the email list, which would be against that compliance, is kind of what's important there. And that's why, if you are a creator on the other side of this, if you have an email newsletter right now and you're really excited about it, and people are opting into it, like, create an LLC, make sure everything's kind of associated correctly, because then that gives you the opportunity to monetize later. It makes the compliance end for your acquirer significantly simpler.
Gotcha. And I think we talk a lot about kind of the grander scale of acquisitions when you're talking about selling your Amazon brand and what the aggregators are looking for and stuff like that. So kind of what T's should be crossed and I's should be dotted if a brand is looking to kind of acquire one of these smaller brands or one of these smaller businesses to scale their brand.
Yeah, so I think the things you kind of mentioned before are huge. Like, okay, has everyone opted in compliantly? Do we have kind of a record of that is checkable? Does this brand have an actual business versus just something sitting somewhere that hasn't been properly paperworked? And then it's really just checking to make sure that the data is what they say it is. It's kind of a little bit simpler than people would think, where it's like, all right, do we see the open rates inside the email newsletter? Do we see the SEO and domain authority and the content? And really just having like a technical person check it to make sure that it's not gamed. But I think it's actually, that's a nice part about these smaller acquisitions, is they are relatively straightforward. And they're also at a level where if you're spending a couple $1,000s or tens of thousands of dollars to acquire an email list, you're playing in a different field than when you're doing a multi-million-dollar acquisition where you're trying to adjust inventory to get to some multiple. Like, has a whole different world. Here it's really just about dotting the technical T's and I's of, is what I'm buying what I think I'm buying.
And where would they find that technical skill in regards to doing the due diligence?
And so I think there's what's nice about the platforms I mentioned is a lot of them actually help. Is that they have specific, they'll give you an advisor on your acquisition who will help you look through that. And that's why if you go straight to somebody, you're going to want to have that acumen. You're going to want to say, hey, I'm an SEO expert, or I have one on the team who's going to be able to go into SEMrush or Ahrefs, whatever tool it is, and verify, or go into ConvertKit or Klaviyo and verify. Versus if you buy it through the platform, where it might be a little more expensive or there's fees, you're going to get someone who's going to sit with you and work you through that process. There's also a number of kind of individual experts on that too. There's a course called NanoFlips where people can learn to do this from a really sophisticated manner. There's individual like small M&A firms that kind of specialize in it. So you have a lot of options in terms of how you engage. But I think the best move is to either learn it yourself or to be kind of using one of these platforms actually going to help you through the process.
And what was the other platform that you mentioned? There was Flippa, and what was the other one?
MicroAcquire.
MicroAcquire, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, and there's individual newsletter-specific acquisitions, et cetera. There's also just the idea of find things that are within the space of your need and just email them and reach out versus people that are offering it for sale. So there's a whole world of options out there because essentially everything has a price, right? And so it's a matter of finding the thing that's a fit for you.
Yeah.
Because I know go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
No, you're good. Go for it.
No, I was just going to ask in regards to, for example, influencers. I know a big topic of conversation, at least last year, was around fake followers, right? And I think it started with like Charlie D'Amelio and the hundreds of thousands of fake followers those big accounts had. But then it's really diving into those that have like 20,000, 30,000 followers. And they might even pay for some fake engagement. That's how they build sort of this status of being an influencer. What would you say to those companies that are sort of concerned with that? What can they do? Well,
social media is a whole nother level of risk, and so that's why I think I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of a gray area because it's against the terms of service for Instagram and Twitter and most places to actually buy an account. So if you do it, you're already in a gray area. And then if you're doing it in a way that you're usually using escrow companies and kind of just like shadier websites and things I won't recommend you do, but they are doable. And then you are really you have to have a social media expert who's going to be able to tell you those things and look at it and look at the engagement. And I would say from what I've seen in this, 9 out of 10 of the accounts that are for sale are fake or do have some kind of are gaming the numbers. And so you really need experts to dive through that. And so I think that buying smaller websites for domain authority, buying people that have existing email newsletters that are really popular, buying content sites, buying like small creative teams or small agencies that specialize in a thing and bringing them in-house. Those are things that I think have a lot of potential. Social media is you may be able to use for your own good, but is significantly riskier. And also the hardest part about that, and I know this, I've actually moved some TikTok accounts around and bought and sold some, is that if you lose the consistency of the content posting or change the angle that you're in the algorithm even slightly, everything falls off. And so you just have a much higher, risk rate that what you're doing isn't going to work. And so I would say that, I would steer a little bit away from that for most people and just continue working with influencers directly or creators directly and measure the real metrics that matter to you. Like, am I getting sales from this? Like, have I given them UTM links? Am I actually seeing the results that I want to see? And try to build deals that incentivize that versus just paying some flat fee for an action.
Yeah. Again, TikTok is so finicky. Like they say, if you shouldn't even delete a TikTok if it doesn't work for you. Just put it in view me only mode or whatever it is. And yeah, you're right. If you miss that consistency, everything falls to pieces. So at what point in time should a D2C brand consider some of these micro acquisitions to kind of fill the need that they have where their team
I would say early. I would say especially for the SEO and email one is something that, like, if you have the cash or have the time and acumen to do it soon, like as soon as you start, you have a real business, you should be looking at that, because jumping domain authority is something that's going to take you years to go. So if SEO is part of your strategy, I would be trying to get a site that's associated with that from the beginning. And then as well on the email side is if you're building up an email list, it's going to take you building the 1 to 100 to 1,000 is a long time. I would look early. And again, these don't have to be big acquisitions. If you buy a content site with a 20 domain authority and 30 related articles to you, and that becomes, and you from the start are able to incorporate that brand where you just actually brand your blog as that name, like that's a win where you don't even have to go through any of these kind of powered by or strange items. You can just incorporate it into your business. And on email as well, you start getting that reach early, and you building from an existing building block versus from nothing is always easier. So I would look at any category that you don't have core expertise on in your team. I would look at doing a small acquisition early. And especially if you have, whether it's you raise capital to start or you have some cash flow from operations or looking to where to spend it, like use it to jump that line versus having to kind of use it to spend to build from scratch.
And then this micro acquisition process kind of ultimately helps the brand whenever they're looking to exit too, right? Because then they can go in with assets. A lot. Yeah, exactly. A lot more assets. What kind of like record keeping or, tracking should they have going on in the back end if they know that ultimately they're wanting to scale this brand to sale to an aggregator or somebody even larger than them? How do they organize all these books?
This may sound, it's funny because it may sound like common sense, but most people just don't do it. And so it's actually keeping like P&Ls and actual accounting statements, and like having a CPA and saying, hey, I spent this on the website. And one key thing too is also is denoting like where you got some of this business from, because people are going to ask, okay, what is your source of revenue right now? And if 90% of it is my personal friends, that has less value than, these people are coming in, or through this advertiser or distributor, because may not gain that value in the acquisition. So keeping good financial records. Second one is process and documenting process. I think that's really important. So if you say, hey, here's how we SEO optimize our website and create our title. Here's how we update it. Here's who does what. Anything that you can make a process of that's as simple as having a Google Doc or a Notion doc where you've written that out. If you're able to go to an acquirer and say, hey, here's all my financial statements, and I have multiple years, and I have tax returns, and then here's what revenue is I feel will stay versus what revenue is going to leave if I leave. And then you're going to say, here's the process with which we update our blog, update our social media accounts. Here's all our contractors' info and their emails and how often we touch base with them. Here's the agendas for every meeting that we hold throughout our business. And here's the meeting schedule. If you have that process document and those financials, you're really equipping whoever purchases you for success. And those aren't that hard to do. It's just few people actually do it.
Yeah, it's time consuming, and you've got to have a type A note taker to be there to do that kind of thing, I would guess.
Or bring in somebody. Like this is also where useful, we're actually getting consultants or finding, hey, whether it's a management coach or a process person on whether it's Twitter or Upwork, or finding someone to say, hey, I want to pay you $1,500 to come in for a day, do a workshop with me and help me make processes for my business. You can probably find someone to help you achieve that. The financial side is I don't want to be catching up on 3 years of back financials with a CPA at the 25th hour, right? You want to be doing that every time. And it's something everyone tends to avoid, but would highly recommend doing it.
Yeah. I've always feared. the messaging of doing your taxes like was very scary to me when I was a kid. Because do you guys remember? I think it was like the E-Trade commercial of like the accountant coming into the home, and it's like, all right, let's do your taxes, and she whips out like 6 boxes of like shoe boxes full of receipts, and I was like, oh, this looks awful. This looks like the worst. So maybe not doing that. Maybe a little more sophisticated than just keeping receipts.
Yeah, and when it comes to processes, our friends over at Escala with Yanni Kosminski could actually help out. Yeah, we have a great episode on that actually when it comes to just documentation and systems and processes that we could always refer back to. So I guess as they're going through these acquisitions, it's for a business owner, particularly as they're planning to scale up, it's knowing what should they do first, right? Should they go into email marketing first? Should they go into social media and working with influencers? I guess, how do you work through all of that with them?
Yeah. And so I think the first I like to look at is SEO is one that you can do. It's a mathematical equation, essentially. You can use a tool. I like to use Ahrefs, AHR, EF, and so you go in and you say, all right, what would people be searching for? They want to purchase something from my business. And what are other common things that they're looking for? And if you look at all those terms and you make a big old list, I usually like to make like 100 terms that might make sense, and you kind of go cross-reference, it will give you a score of how difficult it is to rank on the first page for that. It's called difficulty score. And then they also will give you the estimated traffic of how many people search for that a month, and literally make a chart with the term, the difficulty rating, and the estimated traffic. And if a bunch of them are easy and it says, hey, it's an easy difficulty ranking, and they have traffic that's hundreds or thousands of visits a month, then you should concentrate on SEO. If you go down that list and every single thing is hard or it has low visits, then you shouldn't concentrate on SEO. But I look at that one first because I just feel like it has the longest value with the least cost. You have the upfront costs, you have content creation costs, but maintaining it and keeping on it, you're able to do like relatively, simply over time versus continuing to spend ad dollars. So SEO is the first one I look at. And then with email, it kind of comes down to, are you able to build an email list yourself? And is that working? And do you have someone that's going to actively write it or like a plan for it? And if there's an existing plan in the business and you're actually getting some email working already and you feel like you have momentum, I would think about it less. If you have some momentum and you say, oh, wow, this is a huge channel for us, we're actually making a ton of money for every email as well, it's really working, I'd also look to expedite it with something that's working really well. And if you're kind of in the middle, you can build it yourself. But I think email's the next one I evaluate. And then social just really comes down to the brand. And also have the social savvy nature of the people working there. Like if you don't have a background where you can properly manage that or allocate that or understand social in and out, I feel like you're not going to have success there. And you are probably better focusing on some of these other channels, at least in the short term. And that's kind of at least how I'd evaluate it. But I usually start at SEO 1, email 2, and then social media kind of influencer levels 3. One thing I haven't mentioned as much because it's not acquisition related is collaborations, which I think is huge for is just underused. It's used a lot in B2C brands, but a lot less in B2B brands, and saying, how do you create content together with an influencer in the space or with another brand in the space that makes sense. That's one that kind of isn't as related, but we also tend to go through like the checklist of what's valuable there.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I feel like businesses, like you said, the collaborations in B2B are so much less common. They're always afraid to like lose their clients, I guess, or like give away their list or like, there's plenty to go around though. I mean, there's so many ways that you can collab with. And
when it's so different, like you mentioned, like a process software company, it's like, it'd be completely natural for a sourcing company and a process company to collaborate, and they're both going to gain users, not lose users, right? And it may not be the most glamorous collaboration ever, but is it going to drive value for your consumers? Like that should be the number one metric you're looking at is, if we collab on this, will the other side's consumers be excited? And will our consumers be excited? Then great, let's do as many of those as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's the key piece of it that some business owners kind of miss is are we actually going to be providing more value with this initiative rather than is this just going to feed whatever we need done? Because ultimately that's the only way that's, it's kind of that flywheel or knock-on effect. It's like, if we need more sales, well, we have to give them the value, not just give them what we think. I don't know. It's
hard to think through for a little while. And it's just so many things when you're an entrepreneur that you have to work through that, it's hard to make all those decisions perfectly.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. And one thing that we didn't really touch on, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but SMS. SMS is top of mind. We've had many guests that talk directly about SMS, but is that something that you could potentially acquire through a micro acquisition?
So you probably could. I haven't. And also, if you acquire like a Shopify business or something and they have SMS active, I'm sure you can integrate it. I haven't done anything personally related to that specifically, besides get onboard brands to using SMS. But it all comes down to, hey, are you purchasing someone where you can own the entity and own the process of it? I would be careful with SMS just because of the nature of the relationship that people have when something comes on their phone and how they're going to view it as abusive or terms of service, where people are used to getting emails and continuing to get emails, and SMS is still kind of that frontier. But yeah, I'm sure it's actually possible.
Yeah, SMS has been a big topic of conversation as of late. At least
SMS is great. I've been really encouraging people. You get all these SMSs on your phone, but they're just so unpersonalized. And so I've been encouraging brands. We were working with a retail brand recently where I was like, hey, your SMS should come from a person. Where it's like it should come from Julie, who runs customer service, and actually say that it's from her, and she introduces herself inside the automation, and you feel like you're engaging in a personal conversation, even if it's automated, because that's also, it's not weird. It's what people want, right? It's what actual users are going to say, like, this is a natural form of using this medium. And people are always just battering you over the head with advertisements. And I'd rather have Julie be like, hey, your favorite thing's back in stock, like a picture. Like, oh, let's go, and so it's hard for people to wrap their head around, communicating one to many, that kind of thing. But I think there's a lot of opportunity still in optimizing the SMS experience to actually make sense with how a user uses their iMessage app, right?
Mm-hmm. And so through the acquisitions themselves, and Lisa touched on this when it was talking more so about the data, when we were all talking about sort of the data behind it. But are you able to sort of go in once you acquire, let's say, an email list and learn more about those users? Are you allowed to, for example, like dive deeper into any data points that you acquire through this acquisition?
So if you've bought the company that has the opt-in rights for that email list, then you can append those leads, with any of the services that will give you more information. You can send out a survey, and that's something that kind of when I mentioned that founder email or something saying, hey, we've been acquired by X. Here's what this means. We'd love to get some more information about what you enjoy about the service, and so we can plan correctly for the future. A lot of it's just around having a welcoming message about that, not having it be strange. But again, if you own the rights to that data, you can append it as much as you want. And I think another tool that people just don't use enough is, why do you like my email list? Why do you like my website? Asking people directly. And, whether it's, and even you can do that in unscalable ways too. I know a lot of people say, hey, let's throw out a survey, but okay, put live chat on your website and have, the head of marketing or the founder answer questions for a day and actually ask. You can get a lot of insights there by doing things that don't scale, just actually engaging with your consumers, or even looking at the list of who opens the email the most and sending them a personal email and being like, hey, saw that you did my like, I'd love to learn more about your experience. I feel like there's no such thing as asking your customers too much, about, what they enjoy and what they're looking for.
Yeah, you can always ask the question. Whether or not you get the response is kind of, if you don't ask the question, you're not going to get the response anyway. So go ahead and ask. What were you going to say?
It still feels like it would be overwhelming, particularly for someone that would be scaling up. Is there typically someone within the company that's not, the founder or the business owner that's sort of leading these initiatives?
Yeah, and I think what you'll see, oftentimes it's marketing. It's because a lot of just default things fall on marketing. If you have a sales leader that really cares, it's probably sales. And you'll see, and you can tell if you have a sales leader that cares or not by if they really want to talk to your customers all the time. And then there's a lot of roles here, like especially in software-based companies, there's usually like user experience folks. And in customers that take service seriously, there's customer experience, teams. There's also in companies that are really built out, there's customer success teams who will want that data significantly because it's going to help them do their job better. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity, but in smaller teams, there's only so many people, and there's few people that are going to care as much as kind of like that founding team.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it until you just said how many moving parts and pieces there are. The IT team, God bless them, they've got to do all these integrations and uploads. That's got to be a nightmare for them. Or at least I would think so.
And I guess every acquisition that sort of comes into play, before they even acquire, they have to see what they're looking for, right? Whether ultimately everyone that's in retail is going to think sales, right? It immediately equates to sales. But like you said, it could be just general traffic to your website to build more domain authority. It could be engagement with your email if you integrated it with another email list that you actually, just acquired.
It could be content creation, especially the retail one you mentioned is a good one where it's, hey, if you're a Best Buy, or I don't know if that's a good example or not, but if you have a high domain authority retailer, but you don't really have a bunch of content or a bunch of long-term search content, and you acquire a blog or an email newsletter that just writes a ton, but they don't have the following to actually make a lot of that SEO, and you just say, okay, that lives on our website now, and we have someone who's creating these things that we know our customers want, and we're going to give it way more visibility, like that's a layup too, because a lot of people just haven't been able to find the right creator or the right team or the right people to understand SEO, and just merging authority you already have with someone's content creation, I think is a really useful thing to look at.
Yeah.
And, with all these acquisitions, there's got to be some that fail, right? Some that you just ultimately you buy and it just didn't work out. I guess at what point do you sort of call it quits as a business owner and say, hey, we bought this email list and it's really not working out. We're losing a bunch of them. They're unsubscribing. They're not engaging as much. Before or after analyzing it and maybe coming up with an action plan, when do you know to move on to the next thing that they should be focusing on?
I think that it's funny because the only things that I've seen fail inside of this, like maybe one or two that were just like a bad transaction or was misrepresented to the buyer. But the only other things I've seen fail are just from lack of planning, or from someone saying, we're just going to immediately start blasting this list with X, or hey, we're just going to transition all this content over to our site and not ask an SEO expert. Anything that happens with planning is way more likely to succeed. And again, like having worked through now, about 20 to 30 events like this in the last few years, I mean, most of them have ended up successful, at least from an integration standpoint of now these two things exist together. And whether it lived up to 100% of the expectations is a different story. But that's the nice part about, like, if it's a website, if you just keep doing the things, the content's going to stay there and it's going to have some level of value. It's an email, or as long as you keep emailing the things, it's, a lot of what happens is someone falls off. Hey, we stopped sending the email every week. Now we send it every month. Or, hey, we never actually brought the platforms together, like we never kind of moved those links, or we didn't do stage 3 of the integration process. And if you're having those kind of problems, that's probably indicative of where your company is going to succeed overall, or the right resources that you have devoted to the things that you're trying to engage with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was a great question, Francois. I hadn't even considered that, of like, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Always not all of them are going to work. Scenario, right? Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately it's scary being a business owner, being an entrepreneur. You're always prepared to fail, but it's knowing what's next, right? What is the next thing that you're going to do if you do fail? And, if one of these acquisitions don't work out, they just don't work out. And, as Oren said, it could just be lack of planning. And so as they're sort of going through all of this process for tracking, or I guess attributing their sales or their SEO to this acquisition, are there baseline metrics that they could find anywhere? For example, if they were to, be at a 5 domain ranking and they bought one that's at a 30, is there a certain timeline that they should expect to raise their own domain ranking? Yeah,
and so it depends. So like the domain one's an interesting one, where you can do what's called a hard redirect, basically bring all that content over to your website and then assign to Google that, hey, now this content lives there and it's done. And if that's done right, that's a couple weeks. But if it's done wrong, it could just fail over entirely. And that's where an SEO expert's separate. But I think that in terms of, if you just buy something and let it live as it is, begin integrating your own things, then you're just measuring what's in your funnel, right? It's like, okay, does this traffic, let's make sure everything's tagged. Let's ensure when we click through the link, does it convert? And just having the right comparison group. Okay, let me compare this to my other channels, like I normally compare my paid customers to my organic, that kind of thing. But really, it's just having it be assigned inside your metrics in a similar way, and having your baselines that exist, for all of your other existing channels, and ensuring you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, and I guess that's really what could help create this halo effect between all the marketing teams, right? Between the email marketing and the SEO. If someone's always reading your blogs and they want to sign up to your email subscribe list because they're getting great blogs, then you could start to incorporate more ads, and you just build out all these more complex funnels in a much quicker
And there's going to be intangibles, right? Like you can measure a lot of the metrics related to, do these people click through and buy? When there's intangibles, whether it's the people's affinity for the brand, now there's more content, or whether all these things working together helps the funnel improve overall. And I know metrics have kind of been thrown into this crazy state with iOS 14 of just where I know a lot more people that are just measuring straight, here's our total spend, here's our total value than ever before. And so really a lot of it is there too, holistically, what are our marketing goals, and does this additive thing together? What are those couple key metrics? And I'd say if you're doing more than 3 to 5, you're probably measuring more than you can really tactically pay attention to, unless you have a huge team. And are they improving? And then if not, I think what people do is they'll say this is improving or this isn't, but they're not saying, hey, what are the 5 steps that we're doing that we need to make sure happen to have that succeed? They're really just looking at that metric without the actions. I think that's important to consider too.
Great point.
Definitely. Well, Oren, thank you so much. We're coming up to the end of our hour here. Unfortunately, that happens so fast. It always does. It seems to fly by. Whenever we have podcast days, my day just like runs by me. But if anybody has any questions for you or wanted to learn more about Guinn Partners, where could they find more information, or where could they?
So look, I'm on Twitter at Oren Meets World, and I'm really active on there. And I think that's kind of probably the best place to go and find it. I do have a newsletter called Product People. That's linked in my my LinkedIn and my Twitter and whatnot, where I go through a lot of specifics related to product development. And then if you're trying to develop a prototype on like a complex electronics product that then someone like Novaland could help you source, then GuinnPartners.com. Yeah.
Awesome. And then is there a best size kind of fit for a client for Guinn Partners? Like
people that have, if you are doing anything related to mobility, if you have like, telemetry involved, or like lithium ion batteries, or, things that move, or they use autopilots like that, that's a sweet spot for sure.
What was the first word you said? Telemetry?
Yeah. Telemetry. Yeah. Basically measuring where something exists in space.
Oh, okay. That is
way above our heads.
Yeah, I was about to say, way beyond what I know anything
complex
about.
Technological challenges. GuinnPartners.com.
Awesome. And for anybody listening, that is Guinn, Guinn Partners.com. Awesome. Well, Oren, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciated it. And I think that this has been a really interesting topic that nobody ever really thinks about. We're all talking about like the big acquisitions, the big, aggregators buying everything up. And it's really kind of these tiny buys that can grow these really strong brands. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. And thank you for everybody who tuned in today. If you guys liked what you heard, be sure to give us a thumbs up, comment with your thoughts, share this episode with your friends, subscribe to the show, and be sure to turn on those notifications. And that way you never miss a conversation with leaders in supply chain and e-commerce like Oren Schauble with Guinn Partners. And we will be back tomorrow and every day after that.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.